is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for creators and entrepreneurs to stand out online. More on them later. So Smile is a movie that seemed so much like something that I'd cover that I've had multiple people coming to me saying, hey, what happened to your Smile video? Did you delete it? But no, I never made one of those. Not only did I not make a video about Smile, I actually only watched it for the first time yesterday, so it would have been really impressive if I had an entire video about it. Like, this was so ingrained in certain people's minds that they're telling me that they specifically remember me saying things about the movie and talking about the themes when I didn't even know what the theme of the movie was. I just heard that it was some kind of like a little bit like It Follows. So it seems like we might have our own little mini Mandela effect, or as some people are calling it, the Mandela Effect, which you don't have to do. It actually went a little bit further where people were like, oh, they're probably confusing it with your Truth or Dare video. I don't got one of those either. For that one though, I will say you're probably confusing it with my Fantasy Island video, which is why a lot of you even still started coming at me being like, then why did you have a Lucy Hale standee if you didn't do Truth or Dare? It was the other Blumhouse Lucy Hale Cinematic Universe horror movie. But yeah, even my good pal Friendly Space Ninja was confused. So I figured that today, or what I imagine was yesterday by the time I'm recording this, it was yesterday by the time I'm recording this, the day of Smile 2's release, I would watch the first movie, the short film it was based on that I didn't even know existed until my editor that I asked to work on this told me about it, and the sequel all in one day to see where we land and if that sequel is even necessary. And I gotta say, they're all pretty decent. They're entirely too long for what they are outside the short story, obviously. And while I do think that the second one is probably stronger overall, there is definitely a lot of moments that lag. Some movies just don't need to push an hour and 45 minutes, and these are firmly in that area. Both of these could have been shaved down by at least 20 minutes. The new one is actually over 2 hours long, which felt entirely unnecessary. But you know, when that movie hits, it hits. I actually think the opening sequence might be better than like most of what's in the first movie. I definitely think this new one's a lot easier to anticipate where it's going if you're familiar with the first one, but that's totally fine. It's just obviously when you're watching the first one, you're still not quite sure what they're gonna do, what the tone is gonna be, how far they're willing to commit. But the original Smile follows a therapist, making it easy to keep it contained to her life, while the sequel brings it larger scale with a celebrity returning after a crash out bender, meaning the whole world is paying attention to this entity breaking her down. Though I will say that Voss Water was clearly the major sponsor of the second movie. I counted her chugging 7 bottles of Voss. I might even have missed one. And it honestly left me feeling so secondhand hydrated that the thought of consuming water was making me feel sick. So maybe you had a little bit of a backfire with the branding there, guys. Okay, hilariously, apparently Voss wasn't even a sponsor, so they just did all that for free. But I suppose if it was intentional marketing, they just would have used today's sponsor, Squarespace, to get their name out there. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform for creators and entrepreneurs to stand out online. And I've actually been using them for years. Back when I used to work in esports, I had my whole portfolio there, which was invaluable for getting different work opportunities, and now that I'm a full-time internet idiot, I just have an entire website dedicated to that. With Squarespace, it was easy to design a website that reflects who I am, mildly panicked. With a few simple clicks, I was easily able to link all my social media accounts, videos that matter to me, festival coverage, and more. If you're looking to sell products or courses, they make it easy to manage payments all in one place with Squarespace Payments. They allow you to gate certain content behind a paywall and choose how you want to take payments for that access, whether you want it to be a one-time fee or subscription-based. All that combined with design intelligence to help tailor a more personalized website and integrated SEO to get you discovered by more people more often, and you'll be well on your way to success. So check out Squarespace today at squarespace.com/AmandaTheJedi to start a 14-day free trial and get 10% off your first purchase. So why did it take me so long to watch Smile? Well, I don't know. It just kind of got away from me. For some reason, I thought this came out when I was at TIFF, but no, it was like a solid 2 weeks after that. I do remember being really busy at the time it was out in theaters, even though it stayed in theaters for like 3 solid months. And then I don't know what I was doing when the VOD came out, but for whatever reason, didn't watch Smile, so I didn't end up covering it. I wasn't even really planning to see this new one until I saw that Kyle Gallner and Lukas Gage were in it. I didn't even know until recently that Kyle Gallner was in the first one, and I've loved Kyle's work for years, you know, particularly Dinner in America, which is having its like 4th life right now thanks to TikTok. A bunch of cities are finally screening it in theaters, which is so cool. I've been talking about that movie for years, and I will watch anything scene with Lukas in it after seeing Down Low. And like I said, the only thing I really knew about these movies before going into it is all the viral marketing where they just had people at very crowded events with the creepy smiles on their face, so that, you know, and then they got posted everywhere, and that the smile would somehow lead to their death, which did actually remind me of Truth or Dare at the time. And then eventually I was told that it was actually quite a bit like It Follows. And It Follows is actually one of my favorite horror movies. Before Talk to Me, that was like the last movie I saw that left me with that feeling of like, oh shit, there is evil in this world and it is now following me. And yeah, It Follows is exactly what I was thinking about after watching the first Smile movie, except instead of an STD or sexually transmitted demon, if you will, this one's about trauma. Though I do think it's absolutely absurd that Smile did so well and then finally they were like, okay, we will do a sequel to It Follows, and the sequel to Smile still managed to come out before the sequel to It Follows. But honestly, I think that's like a pretty decent direction to take things, spreading the trauma in a really interesting way while also focusing in on the trauma those people already had to take hold and like just mentally abuse them more. As mentioned, the first movie follows a therapist named Rose Cotter who comes to treat a patient named Laura who's been traumatized as the only witness to one of her professors taking his own life in front of her brutally with a hammer and now seems to be seeing things. Now, the short film Laura Hasn't Slept is actually an interesting jumping off point for these movies. It is the same character who plays Laura in the short film and in Smile, so it's the same actress. It's supposed to be the same character, but they really changed what the story was aiming to do, so you can't even really consider it like a snapshot of the larger film or a prequel to the larger film. Basically, it starts with her at a therapist's office talking about nightmares and whether or not it's possible to die while having a nightmare, and specifically talking about this recurring one she's having every single night that always starts differently but always has the same man smiling at her.
But it's not like a friendly smile. There's something the matter with his eyes.
And even though it's visually a different man every single time, she knows it's the same one because of that smile and his eyes. And at this point, she's particularly terrified because she's pretty sure the next time she has this dream, she's going to die. He's going to force her to see his real face. And she does such an excellent job conveying the sleep-deprived panic before the therapist starts to point out what she should have been thinking all along. What is it that brought her to him in this moment? Has she ever seen him before? Is this even her therapist?
Have we ever even met before?
Where Smile is playing more on distorting reality, the short film all takes place in this nightmare, confirmed when you can see her brain firing synapses outside the window. So it honestly feels like they took a concept that felt like it had way more in common with something like Nightmare on Elm Street and then decided to basically have it be It Follows in a slightly different way. So in the full movie, when Laura gets to Rose, it actually kind of feels similar to this scene because she's kind of venting out to this therapist. It's very frantic, it's very panicked, and she's seeing things, people smiling, always different, but she always knows it's the same thing. Before she completely starts freaking out about something in the room that Rose can't see, collapses before brutally killing herself in front of Rose with a sickening smile on her face. And that's the transfer. Laura got it from the professor and Rose got it from Laura. So for most of this movie, we're really just watching Rose descend more and more into psychosis. And unlike a lot of movies where the person is just saying things to make other people think they're unwell, but we know they're not, this movie actually has her delivering lines in ways that you're like, okay, maybe maybe there is actually something more psychologically going on here than just some kind of haunting, because there's just no way anyone would believe her based on the things she's saying. Like, one of the things that actually pissed me off the most about this movie is the way they lingered in on the cat when she was feeding it at first, and I was like, that cat is absolutely gonna die. And then what happens is that when she doesn't realize, she kills the cat and wraps it for her nephew while she thinks something completely different is happening in that moment, and then tells the sister, oh no, that wasn't me, that was the entity.
By an entity. No, it's what killed Mustache.
So like, yeah, obviously people are gonna think she's a little bit unwell. But before it starts ascending into that full zone, she just starts seeing people smiling up at her from below her office, inside the house, progressively getting more and more horrific, largely linking back to her imagery of Laura before it starts shifting to her mother, which we will find there's also some trauma around there. And other than all the direct people around her, like her fiance, sister, and sister's husband, one of the detectives that came to talk to her about Laura is Kyle Gallner, and that is her ex, Joel. And with his help and access to police records, she figures out that this has been going on for way longer and way before the professor, that every single person who has ended their life in front of someone within a week before that had another police file on record saying that they witnessed someone else doing the same thing. And in every single situation, the people only last 4 to 7 days before doing this, and all of them reported being tormented by visions and horrors and weird hallucinations. Now, as she continues to see things, we start finding out more about her life and childhood, and the reason why she became a therapist was to help people because of the trauma she experienced around her abusive mother, who ended up taking her life, and Rose was the one who found her. She had apparently apparently been mentally unwell her entire life, and this is becoming even more concerning to people because they now think she's kind of inheriting those same issues her mom probably had, and her fiance in particular jumps right down her throat about it.
I am not crazy!
But it's genetic, isn't it?
And while he's being a dig about it, I do kind of get it, even if this is by way of demonic intervention. She is, in fact, losing her mind. Thankfully, Joel's still there for the support, though, and unfortunately, the only solution he seems to be able to find is that one person managed to break the chain, and it's because they killed someone else, and then the person who witnessed that murder had the curse passed on to them instead. So specifically, this thing feeds on trauma and needs a traumatic event to infect a new host, so whatever happens has to be fairly disturbing and brutal. Can't just casually push someone down the stairs and hope for the best, or the worst. And murder isn't really something she's willing to do until she reaches a breaking point of realizing that this thing can make her think she's having entire conversations with people that aren't happening. So she plans to kill a schizophrenic that she was treating before realizing that she never made it inside the hospital. It's a pretty interesting scene because she does actually start going through with it, but then it's not doing anything and the dude just starts screaming back at her in a comical way, and then she just like snaps out of it in her car. So yeah, the thing about this entity is that it's actually pretty horrific, or not horrific at all, depending on how you look at it and look at movies, because it doesn't really have to follow any rules. Once it's in your mind, it's there, and it's not something you can logic your way out of, just like mental illness, just like a lot of mental illnesses. But I also get that it can feel unsatisfying if it's just this thing that can do anything and there's no real way to get out of it once you hit a certain breaking point. And then there's just nothing you can do. It's hard to kind of pull off that tone when it feels like nothing matters anymore. And I do feel like these movies do a pretty good job of it. So the new plan is to confront the demon alone, or really rather that if she's alone when she dies, it can't pass itself on. So she ends up at her abandoned childhood home, which honestly seems like a terrible idea considering this thing that's mentally torturing her is like starting to take over her mother and use the mother as the new form of torment. It basically seems like when it first takes over you, it's using whoever you just saw die to torment you until it kind of infects your brain and learns more about you, and then it can start being way more specific about your specific trauma and hurts in life to come at you. So she just literally entered ground zero of the worst place she could be for this thing to mess her mind up. And yeah, that's exactly what happens. It literally lets her think that she outsmarted it and defeated it before this massive monstrosity of her mother crawls inside her, which is the representation of her being fully possessed.
You can't escape your own mind, Rose.
Just in time for Joel to show up to try to save her, and just has to watch in horror as she lights herself on fire. Something about the smile literally freezes people so they can't even intervene if they want to. Because there was plenty of time for him to tackle her, but it's just like, it won't let you do it. And honestly, this is probably my favorite shot of the entire movie. Instead of focusing on her going up in flames, you just see her burning in the reflection of his eyes. And I think that that was a great way to do that. And then it just ends like that is such a solid ending. I also like that it shows setting her on fire as almost as like a weird fuck you for the revenge because she thought she lit it on fire and burned it to death earlier. So yeah, pretty solid movie overall, and definitely left itself open for a sequel, but it also clearly could have left things in the chilling conclusion that we just got, knowing that the same fate is now waiting for Joel. It's a solid ending right there. I get that sometimes it's nice for things to have a happy ending, but like it's also nice when horror movies are just like cruel and mean, and I get that it's no talk to me, but like this was pretty solid. Overall, I thought it had a lot of decent chilling moments, some really fantastic visuals, even if you can argue that it's scarier when you don't see a monstrous representation of how small her abusive mother made her feel, but I like that it was literally shedding its other skin so it could start wearing hers. Fully understanding that sometimes with monsters, telling and not showing is better. I think it kind of had a nice mainstream blend of like the typical like lower quality jump scare horror movies that we get a lot of, and then something trying to be a little bit more, even if the central thing it has been done better and more chillingly in other movies. I think it does do a great job towing that line, but it definitely didn't leave me with that same chill that It Follows did. But yeah, that brings us to Smile 2, that picks up directly with Joel about 6 days later, so he is running out of time, clearly using his police knowledge to hunt down someone he believes deserves to die to get the heat off of him. And there's just this shot of him walking towards the house where just off to the side of his peripherals is just Rose on fire, which is just so incredibly stark against the snow. I love it. What an excellent image. Like, put that on a shirt for me. It's pretty cool when it focuses in on it, but I thought it was the most effective when he's just walking and it's just there off to the side. But his plan pretty quickly goes to shit because he's not fully in his right mind and accidentally shoots the witness, who obviously tried to shoot him back. I guess that just makes it transfer back to him, but then he realizes that he accidentally passed it on to Lukas Gage's character, who was there picking up drugs. So that boy got double trauma. He saw 2 murders before Joel still ends up dead by trying to run away from people at the house and getting rammed by a truck. And it is so brutal. Like, it starts panning up the blood and you just see his foot detached in the road, entrails leading into a curve where the truck crashed into a tree as it pans out to reveal that bloody smile. Man, I really thought that Kyle was going to be in this one more. I didn't watch any of the trailers, so I had no idea what to expect and just assumed that he'd be the focus of this one. But, you know, shit, at least he got a good death. Totally on board with him being a final boy, though. Somebody make it happen. Put him in a horror movie where make him a Sidney Prescott. Make him a Sidney Prescott. And then instead of flipping us directly to Lucas, we pick up with Skye Riley, a pop star who recently came back from recovery after going on a series of benders that resulted in her and her boyfriend getting into a car crash that killed him. And a lot of her story feels really poignant for the time of things that have been happening this year, the lack of boundaries with celebrities, the way the mental health issues you had before almost always get worse because of the constant pressure and exposure to people around the world, how every single thing you do is scrutinized, but also specifically the pressure that can come from within your own camp when you know you have nothing left to give and it's the people that actually matter to you that are stressing you out. And then obviously this is all just gonna get heightened by some supernatural shit. But Lucas, or Lewis, gets pulled back into the story because even though she's off drugs and alcohol, her back is still super messed up and she's just kind of been swirling away some Vicodin and needs a little refill. So Lucas, once again, coming back to be the party maker, but the first indication that something is weird is when she asks if she can come through and he just answers with the star smiling emoji. Ruh-roh, Reggie. I don't know why I did that. I both don't know why I did that, and I don't know why I didn't commit to actually doing it well. And once she gets there, he has no recollection of messaging her, almost kills her, and then bashes himself to death with a weight. And they did not remotely shy away from this. It is just like this slow, brutal smash where you just hear the blood and weird sinew of bone and tissues, and then it lingers there before pulling it away, and you hear all those sounds and just this bloody smile you can barely decipher, and then he just keeps going until he collapses. Is very effective. Why did I explain that so verbosely? But damn guys, both my faves gone in like 20 minutes? That's brutal. I almost never turn up for the boys, and once I do, you take them away that fast? So this is where I find this one gets really interesting. We now have someone with a history of drug use trying to make it back into her career, about to start a tour, and she's gonna start behaving very erratically. Exactly at a moment where all of her fans are really waiting for her to come back and all the haters are waiting for her to fail. And even though the ending is so obvious from the second they introduce her character, it's still fun to watch it get there because they commit to the brutality and cruelty even more than in the first movie, I'd say. I also think Naomi Scott did really great in this, outside like a couple of moments where her accent breaks, and it's definitely worth the time if you're someone who even like somewhat enjoyed the first movie, because they definitely push it further in this installment. But again, I will say it's entirely too long. There are so many areas in this one specifically that could have been trimmed down. I feel like I've seen more pop concerts in movies that aren't about pop concerts this year than I have in reality. All I'm saying is that Skye Riley and Lady Raven would have a lot to talk about. But back into the movie and how so many things could have gone wrong. After witnessing Lewis's death, she doesn't call the cops because there's drugs all over the house and she just pulled herself out of a career pit, and that's a sure way to get back to it, because why else would you be here with a pound of coke on the table? Now honestly, this is where you kind of have to suspend some disbelief. I feel like they would have tracked her down pretty quickly. I'm sure this building has cameras. I'm sure that the guy who sells drugs out of his apartment has his own security cameras. They also would have checked phone records. Her best case scenario was cops finding him and not doing any deeper dive because they saw all the drugs and assumed he just had his own psychosis. But you know, she's really not helping herself by Googling whether or not you can find DNA in vomit. Remember guys, a lot of people who end up on trial end up further humiliated because they specifically Googled things in relation to their crime. Man, stop giving advice to criminals! And like Rose before her, Skye's psyche starts to fail pretty quickly. She starts seeing Lewis all over the place. I love this head tracking shot concealing his face. A kid at her meet and greet is definitely the smile demon, which happened after a stalker tried to make a move on her, which was already terrifying enough as it is, and they really went out of their way to make him just seem as gross as possible. All topped off with her mom, who's also her manager, just not really seeming to take any of her mental state seriously beyond pushing her to get this career relaunch done. Skye then hallucinates that stalker is in her apartment later that night and running at her naked. Thankfully, he was not actually there. Because he could have been. So she's kind of hitting her limit here and invites her old friend Gemma over. Maybe. This is someone she had completely freaked out on when she was drunk and high all the time. You can see like the text thread of the messages. It's pretty funny. But so many of the interactions in this movie are interesting because, you know, Skye actually tells Gemma about what happened to Lewis because I guess they all went to high school together, and she just really quickly agrees like, oh yeah, no, you absolutely can't call the cops because it would ruin your career. But it's like so overly chill. She doesn't ask any more questions about like, were there cameras? Are you sure no one saw you? Like, is it gonna end up being worse if we don't call the cops? Just completely blows past it. But of course, even with someone around, the entity still tortures her all that night and continues into the next day, where it makes her think she re-snapped her leg while dancing. Okay, Suspiria. Okay, Mia Goth. Except unlike that movie, it did not actually happen here. Her leg is totally fine, but that means that this thing doesn't just make you think things are happening, it can make you feel like extreme pain as if it did actually happen. Like, we got Scarlet Witch level reality manipulation going on here. She then completely bombs out at a charity event because the teleprompter stops working, and it really just shows the depths of which her own mental health is struggling even without this outside force. But then of course that entity comes in to just drive it all home by making her see her ex that died in the car crash before she knocks some poor old woman off the stage. So, you know, the career collapse seems a little bit imminent. Now, before all that happened, she ended up getting a text message from someone saying that they knew she was at Lewis's apartment, and I assumed that that was actually just the entity giving her hallucinations and like a very specific thing that would make her specifically panic, or actually honestly anyone panic. But no, she then gets another one that specifies that they know that this is Skye Riley, which is even scarier, but then follows it up by saying that they know what's happening to her and what happened to Lewis because whoever this is was trying to get to him in time to help based on some social media posts he was making about seeing someone in his apartment that wasn't there. So against all logic, she goes to meet up with this person in a public place, and he picks a bar. So she's a recovering alcoholic celebrity in New York City at a dive bar populated by young 20-somethings, so very rough choice for a public place, buddy, but whatever. But he ends up explaining to her, well, we already know that this is a curse. It passes through people witnessing traumatic deaths, and he knows about it because his brother was from 8 cycles ago. And his theory is that the only way to completely stop this thing is for the host to die without transferring it, so he wants to kill her. But like in a non-traumatic way and just temporarily, like he's a nurse and he wants to stop her heart and then bring her body temperature way down, then bring her back. And very much urging that she has to go with him right now or it'll be too late. This thing's already been inside her for almost 4 days, which is typically when people start to die. But she just ends up running out of the bar once people recognize her, and that really sealed her fate in that exact moment, because that night the entity torments her as her dancers who hold her down start ripping out her hair, which is something she actually does to herself in extreme panic and stress with her own mental health issues, which is trichotillomania, I believe is what it's called. And then one of them stuffs its hand down her throat, which is what I call the partial possession. She's alone right now, so it doesn't want to do its grand entering, but it's an indication that nothing from this point on can be trusted as real. So she wakes up in a private treatment facility with her mom, and she's trying to tell her mom that like, I can't do the tour, I can't handle any of this, and her mom just keeps saying that they'll be sued millions and it'll ruin everything and there'll never be another chance for her to revamp her career. All her biggest fears, but also definitely things her mom would be saying based on what we've seen the mom say throughout the movie so far. But then her mom does ultimately shift into the smile demon and starts to stab the shit out of herself with a broken mirror before it shifts, and we see that she actually stabbed the shit out of her own mother. Which again, we know can happen. In the first movie, she killed her cat when she thought she was wrapping a gift. But her reaction here is like weird. Like, she does seem initially horrified at what she did, but it's more just the general stress of the situation. She is not breaking down in the way I feel most people would if they thought they just killed their own mother because of a demonic parasite. Even if you did have issues with how your mom treated you your entire life, I feel like there might be a little bit more of a reaction going on here. Whatever, she makes her grand escape by stealing a security guard's gun before her label guy Darius is like, come on, think about the tour. To which she does rightfully respond, fuck the tour, which was great, but that whole interaction just made me think of the arrest records for Justin Timberlake where the cop didn't know who he was. Man gets arrested and the first thing out of his mouth is, oh god, this is gonna ruin the tour. What tour? The world tour. It's so fucking good. Anyway, she decides she has to make it to Morris to try to stop this whole thing from happening, and conveniently Gemma is just waiting outside for her and agrees to go on this mission even though she is covered in blood with a gun in her hand. And as they're on their way to Staten Island where all the magic happens, the real Gemma calls her. Basically saying that after Skye left her that message a couple days ago, she wasn't really sure she was even going to call back, and then Skye started sending her a bunch of weird text messages, but, she decided to call back after all. So that means that this is obviously not Gemma, but it also means that whoever was at the apartment was not Gemma, and that Gemma was never actually there at all. Now, we do know that some people think this is actually a double lie from the demon, and that Gemma was there with her that night, and it's trying to make her feel even that much more unsettled. But one of the first things I noticed the next morning in the apartment when Skye wakes up late and her mom shows up to get her mom, who just the day before was like, oh, you should really call Gemma and see if she wants to come on tour. Like, she's great. I love her. Doesn't even acknowledge Gemma in the room, and then doesn't say anything when Gemma specifically says hi to her.
Hey, Elizabeth.
I know the mom is off screen when she says hi, and it felt like it was being played for comedy, but the way it was being played for comedy didn't really make sense with the context of the movie. So now I feel like that confirms that she wasn't actually there. But either way, in this moment, she's not there. Skye is actually the one driving the SUV, but still makes it safely to the abandoned Pizza Hut where they will be conducting this experiment. So he's explaining the rundown. It all seems to check out, but then he leaves the room, and I'm like, nah, he's not there. There's no shot that he leaves. He's got everything set up right there. He's been waiting for this moment. There is no reason for him to leave. And yeah, almost immediately she starts getting tormented by herself from the night the accident happened, because even though she wasn't the one driving, they were both high as hell, arguing, and she yanked the steering wheel, leading to his death and her near death. So that's why there's all this added guilt. She's had the opportunity to move past this, to try to continue her career, for people not to realize how involved she was, and that guilt has just been festering.
I like wearing your skin.
Now, much like the first movie, they do try to give us just like some moments of hope that she can actually defeat this thing on a physical plane. Like, she bites its fingers off, and then she tries to stab herself with the drug to stop her heart, but there is nothing in her hand, because there's nothing here at all, because she's not here at all. She's on stage for night 1 of her tour, which is exactly what I assumed was going to happen when they put this thing inside a celebrity who was about to go on a world tour after an extended hiatus, that this thing was going to love the opportunity to try to put itself in as many different people as possible. And especially when you start having someone like Morris knocking around with a plan to try to stop it completely, the ability to ramp up seems like the logical next step. So damn, a bunch of preteens are about to have a wild week, because they're on stage, it fully rips its way into her body and makes her stab herself in the eye repeatedly with her microphone. But again, like in the first movie, you really just hear the thudding sounds as the camera is just focused in on the audience and the people watch it, and how instantly frozen they are the second they see the smile. Like, even the people in the nosebleeds are getting it full on the Jumbotron. But unlike the first movie where it just ends on the reaction, which I did think was fantastic, it pans back to her with the microphone in her eye, just so you know exactly what just happened. And that's the movie. And I feel like overall, it really upped the best aspects of the first one. Now, again, in the first one, you really feel that this character is having this like psychotic break, and it's why people are like, oh my God, is the same thing happening to you that happened to your mom? And it made it feel very unique in comparison to other movies that have like unreliable narrators or characters that people stop believing, because I can fully understand why no one around her would have wanted to listen to her. So at first I kind of felt that was lacking from this movie, because she's definitely having really strong reactions and not doing well, but then I realized it does make more sense to make it seem like she's having a relapse to the people around her versus just some kind of like mental health or a mental illness issue. Again, I think it really just ties into the way this entity seems to be able to get inside you, figure out the thing that's wrong with you, and express that so severely to the outside world that there's like no shot that anyone would ever want to listen to you for what's happening, because it's already super unbelievable, but then put it out there in a way that makes the most sense for the people around you to not take you seriously. But again, this one is just too long. There are definite moments that drag. There are music sequences that, while good, feel like they go on for too long. I get that you got someone who is both a great singer and performer and dancer, and you're using that to your benefit. Like that first dance sequence where they're like spinning her upside down feels very related to a lot of the cinematography in this movie where things flip upside down, and that is cool. But I just don't feel like those segments needed to last as long as they did in a lot of those situations, especially when the movie's already over 2 hours long. But obviously those don't make up for the bulk of this movie. There were other areas that were technically more building into the horror that I also felt dragged and could have been tightened up. I will say that the ending sequence definitely feels way more rewarding than in the first movie, where a lot of the stuff that happens in the house just doesn't really feel that interesting to me. Maybe I'm an outlier there, but like once she got to the house, I was just kind of like, okay, like I get it. It's like the mom stuff. This is kind of creepy. Some of it works. You're just kind of waiting for it to be over. And I feel like the only only thing that saved that ending from feeling bland is that they didn't commit to any kind of happy ending. So I just feel like the hope they tried to instill in this movie that they took away had way more of an impact compared to the first movie, even if you are kind of expecting it. And that opening sequence with Kyle Gallner is just, it's unmatched. It's unmatched. And if they decide to do a third one, I'm genuinely interested to see how they handle a bunch of preteens doing all that, or like if they're just going to focus in on one person, if it's going to be some world epidemic, or if they kind of rightfully have to stop it here because it would get way too ridiculous, but who knows? I also really appreciate that this one is still very focused on mental health issues, but then kind of addressing it in a very different way and very different type of mental health issues versus like, you know, trauma that happened to you as a kid from someone who had a mental illness, and whether that transfers over to you either through hereditary means or because of what you saw. And then this one being more the like celebrity mental health issues and the pressure that adds, and how you're not always given the opportunity to heal, which felt very poignant for the time, definitely more poignant than they could have anticipated when they were filming this, just with a lot of different artists like Chappell Roan kind of speaking up about their mental health issues and about the boundaries being crossed in areas and about the people that show up at their houses and do terrible things. So I think it's good that this movie is out there and that people are pushing for healthier boundaries, because a lot of people out there are scary as hell. Even I have delusional people coming at me regularly. But that is going to do it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know if you saw the movie and what you thought of it. I feel like the general consensus right now is that this one is better than the first one, even though a lot of people thought this was just like a cheap cash grab. So it's always nice when people can kind of defy those expectations with what they're doing. I also just put out my TIFF coverage video. So if you're looking for a bunch of upcoming movies with some no spoiler thoughts for what you might be into, feel free to check that one out. And if you're just a general fan of horror and thriller, I've been covering a lot of those movies recently on this channel. So take a little look through my back catalog in case you missed something. But thanks again so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon subscribers and YouTube channel members. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing. All my other social medias are listed down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later.